We can learn a lot about the Australian people simply by understanding how we spend our money. There was used to be a wonderful tool that we could look to. The Household Expenditure Survey asked 10,000 households extremely detailed questions about how they use their money. This survey is only run every 5 to 7 years, and therefore the results are quite slow, even though we were able to find out fantastic insights about the Australians. Between 2010 and 2016, we spent 60% less on curtains, we spent 22% less on canned spaghetti, and we spent almost 400% more on women's leisure wear, women's active wear, that is. So interesting insights that tell us a couple of shifts about the Australian mindset from the consumer perspective. The problem with this data set, of course, is that it's extremely expensive to run, that the data only comes out every 5, 6, 7 years. So it makes perfect sense that the ABS looks at more up-to-date, more live data sets where we understand how we spend our money. And one of those experimental ways of looking at spending behavior is looking at Australian supermarket scanner data. We just, aggregate all those scans when you're at the cash out at the supermarket, and then we understand how shopping behaviors changed. So let's look at the quick before and after supermarket shopping behaviors changes pre-COVID and now. So we have data for the quarter of June in 2019 pre-COVID and data for the same quarter in 2021. Overall, supermarket sales increased 14%. Makes perfect sense. Supermarkets are the only entertainment venue, if you will, that is still open and accessible to all of Australia. And the middle aisle of Aldi, of course, is entertainment, pure entertainment. So that makes sense. That's our benchmark, 14%. What are the big fat increases that we saw? We saw through the roof sales in seafood, rock lobster in particular, and this has not so much to do with the changing shopping preferences of Australians during the pandemic or due to COVID, but this is a geopolitical issue here. China, in an attempt to slap Australia on the wrist, started a bit of a trade war that resulted in really cheap rock lobster prices in Australia, simply because the big Chinese sellers weren't allowed to buy them anymore. So prices are low for seafood, so we might as well purchase the expensive lobster and oyster kind of things a bit more frequently in Australia. That makes sense. Also, massive increase in sales, 82% up for prepared meals. These are the TV dinner, ready-made frozen meals and so on that you find all over your supermarket shelves. That makes sense to me that those increase. We handle working from home, we handle homeschooling, anything that kind of makes life a bit easier, that simplifies the day-to-day management of a family will make you a big fat profit. That's wonderful. We also saw fairly high increases in all the dinner staples, meats, bread rolls, vegetables. They all increased by around 20 to 30% or thereabouts, simply because we cook more at home, because we don't eat out as often, even though you might order Uber Eats a bit more. And perfect average sales are happening in the cereal aisle. We don't buy more Wheat Bix, we don't buy more milk than expected. Breakfast always was taken at home, so that hasn't changed if we are not allowed to leave home. I was a bit surprised to see that coffee also grew at just these average 14%, because I would have figured that we buy heaps more coffee, since we drink coffee not at the office anymore, but at home, at least many of us. But I would guess then that the less than average or less than expected increases were largely due to Australians taking to coffee walking dates with their friends, with their one-on-one friend that they are allowed to socialize legally with. So coffee didn't, at least in the supermarket shelves, didn't go through the roof, as I probably would have expected. The big surprise here is that we saw a just -1 or -2% decrease in the sales of sugar and chocolates. Who would have thought? I would have thought we are stuffing our faces during the pandemic, just to deal with the emotional shock of lockdown somehow. But apparently we are already, because this is the June quarter of, a year and a half, or a year at least, of lockdowns behind us. Maybe we are starting to fight the COVID kilos a bit by limiting our chocolate consumption. We're also spending heaps less money on animal intestines from the butcher, and that's largely, I would argue, there's a demographic story in here as well, that by now the big cohort entering the family formation stage of the life cycle are the millennials, and they simply don't know how to deal with this kind of produce, so they're not utilizing it. We also saw a big fat decrease in ice sales. Crushed ice, again, makes sense. If you're not allowed to throw parties, you don't need eskies full of ice. So these are a couple of the insights from the supermarket scanner data. On my column, I published all the data. There's around 85 or thereabouts supermarket items that we can compare pre-COVID and now during COVID, and have a look at this. Play around, scan for your favorite items and see how this might have changed during COVID. And of course, read the full column. And if you want more of these kind of little data stories, please feel free to subscribe to this YouTube channel.